So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining from different parts of the world. I really thank the Commonwealth Commission for inviting me and to be a part of the Interchange 2026. And so my topic for today is lessons from the field. Um, and today I'm here to actually talk about the places, the people, and the moments from my personal experience that somehow happened to shape how I think, how I work, and now make decisions. It'll be a 30 to 40 minute kind of a talk followed by a Q&A session. So if you happen to have any questions along the way, do drop it in the Q&A section, and I'll definitely be very happy to address it at the end of our talk. So without further ado, I'll begin. When we say the field, we often imagine rural villages or project sites. But the field I realize is not just a place, it's a mindset. It's where theories become uncomfortable and where policies meet people, where ideas and ideals, constraints, they'll collide with constraints and where our values are challenged. And if you keep yourself really open, if you really choose to be open, the field can teach you insights that no textbook ever will. So, in my lesson today, I'm just going to take you through a little bit of how my career trajectory has been, the different kinds of experiences I've had the privilege to have, and also some of the insights I've been able to derive from the varied experiences. And I really hope it helps you as young leaders, as the future of tomorrow, and helps you shape your thinking and your worldview as well. So, my education and my career path has definitely not been linear. I've studied sociology, then law, then public policy at Cambridge. I've worked across different spaces, grassroots villages, justice sector institutions, working with the Ministry of Trade and International negotiations, with government bodies and central government policy making and appraisal processes, and as a founder of my own cultural institutes. So a little bit about what each of them entailed, because this is a bit important for what is going to follow post that. So when I come to the villages at grassroots level work, one of the experiences that I had and one of the tasks that I had to do was to conduct door-to-door surveys in one of the rural villages to understand how government schemes work on paper. We helped communities design livelihood models and microfinancing for, say, like local handicrafts, local handlooms, spices sector. We tried to help children belonging to, the tribal community in conflict-affected areas or certain parts of the country. Tried to set up renewable energy and, green infrastructure projects. And so the width and diversity is, worked with the Archaeological Survey of India to raise funding to conserve heritage monuments and so on and so forth. So all of this was real hands-on work, working with the community, working at the grassroots level, sitting in homes, in schools, in the villages, and with the community. Then came, my role with civil society organizations or other non-governmental organizations, that work which entailed hosting nationwide youth campaigns, legal literacy programs, working with juvenile justice courts, prisons, de-addiction centers, and in public interest litigation. Uh, then coming on to my work with courts, I worked as a lawyer for some time, then assisted a senior jurist in legal research and drafting, tried to contribute to judicial reform and new legislative provisions in different contexts, worked on programs pertaining to doorstep delivery of justice and all kinds of sensitization programs. Then moving on to international negotiations, given my background as a lawyer, I got to be a team member of all the free trade agreements and plurilateral agreements that India was negotiating or is negotiating in different countries. Got to be a chance to be the core negotiating team member for that, and all sorts of the work which entail legal research, policy drafting, stakeholder consultations, bilateral, multilateral meetings, actually going and negotiating I got the privilege to be a part of those teams. And finally, coming to my current role in the central government, I currently appraise large-scale public sector projects and programs affecting multiple social sectors, trying to work on different roadmaps in different sectors like agriculture, tourism, law, and been a facilitator at many national level conferences, programs, and also I'm a trainer in different capacity building institutes which kind of train state government officials in different aspects. And finally, it is founding my own arts organization. I am a classical dancer. I've done my master's in Kathak, which is an Indian classical dance form. So founded an arts for development organization called Trinkla, where we try to use it as a means to sort of spur dialogue around social realities and use arts diplomacy uh, to engage in intercultural dialogue. So there are some questions that have been asked throughout my journey that why such divergent paths? Why don't you specialize in something? But then I realized that at the core of my vision or intention is that I want to be a change maker. I want to somehow contribute towards nation building. And we as so at the heart of it, we have to be problem solvers. We have to be institutional enablers. And but being a problem solver, this does not really respect disciplinary boundaries. So instead of chasing a straight line, I've tried to kind of choose a connected one, seemingly disparate but coherent one. And most of it has happened organically. And I will be sharing my learnings with you soon. But each learning, each experience has led and has helped me develop the worldview that I have today. And it's definitely an approach, it's a feeling, it's a mindset that just theoretical exposure would definitely not let me have. And I did not move across disciplines because I was uncertain. I moved because each stage kind of revealed the limits of the previous one. For example, sociology, it taught me to see inequality as a lived reality. You know how caste, gender, class, poverty, power, and different ethnicities and intersectionalities shape our everyday lives. But understanding why injustice exists was not enough. So then law, I went on to do law, which taught me the language of rights, of accountability and institutions and rules that govern society today. Yet I often saw that law on paper and in statutes would often fail people on the ground. And the public policy degree then gave me tools to really work at scale, to design systems, allocate resources, and shape outcomes for millions. But I also realized that policy stays relevant only when it works on the ground. So across, NGOs, courts, international negotiations, or policy work, the setting changed, but the purpose did not. And the purpose has always been, the same. It's to make systems fairer, it's to make justice more accessible and everyday lives a little better for our fellow citizens. So through my remaining slides, I would like to take you a little bit through my journey and just share few tidbits from each experience and what I've been able to imbibe from that. So let me take you back during my university days where I was studying sociology, and we had a field research element over there. So one of my projects was to research on the issue of child labor in the southern part of the country, and I specifically focused on bangle making and the rag picking industry. So a lot of times I read the laws around it, I read the ILO convention, I read all the statutes and sort of policies around that space. But what I really found was something very different. That yes, we don't lack laws. We have a strong legislation. We have a lot of bans. Yet child labor persists, and it persisted extremely. It was very widespread in the areas that I was surveying. Uh, and it exists in a very invisible, in a very quiet kind of a manner. Because the question I used to ask all of them is that, when the state is giving you such good education, you have free education, there's a Right to Education Act, you will be getting free education, free meals, free nutrition, free health support to a certain age. And I would ask the parents, why are you sending your children to work? don't you see that, of course, you're going against the law, but also the economic multiplier effect and the financial, long-term financial logic of an educated child vis-a-vis somebody who's just working in very informal sectors from a very young age. But all of them would say that a child's extra day of work would mean a choice between 1 or 2 meals for the entire family. And that's when it actually struck me that policy always assumes choice, where in this case, families were often dealing with just survival. And so in many of these households, education was directly, sort of not going to school was directly correlated to additional income for their family. So schooling then became a luxury and not a right. Uh, Obviously there is a lot of normalization of child labor that we've had. There are some loopholes in the law as well. So children till 14 years of age, they are banned, but between 14 and 18, there are some sort of conditionalities which come over there. Then there is a bit of corruption. There is not enough manpower who can go and inspect at the ground level. There is a provision that allows children working in family enterprises, but many a times informal sectors, they give tasks to households, for example, making bangles or making beedies, which is like a form of tobacco. It's like a cigarette, but you kind of make it at your homes. So all of these things, and even at times, a lot of times when rehabilitation would happen through the state, somehow the system would just get them back into the workforce. So it was a cycle, and uh, yeah, it seemed like a never-ending cycle. But then it realized that regulation is actually the weakest, and inspections rarely reach in these places. So even though we have the law on paper, it doesn't really percolate to the ground, and the social reality is very different from what we usually see. Um, another case that I had was in uh, the western part of India, in a village. I had been deputed to conduct surveys, household surveys, on the implementation, efficacy, and effectiveness of different government schemes. So one of the schemes I was looking at was on pension for old people. They used to get some £5 a month as their retirement pension at that time. And they had to go to the post office or the state office to kind of show that they're alive and sign off or register. And then they would be given the pension in the form of cash. So many households say that, I had to receive pension on such and such date, but I was unwell. I was not able to go to the office. I was outside. I'd gone to meet my family member. And when they would go to the state office, the officials would tell them, oh, you're late. So your pension has gone back. And they would make them sign a register, kind of what they thought they were signing off a pension going back. But we all kind of know what that meant. And that's where, I found many such loopholes. In fact, we were a team. And then we were able to sort of relay that information back, at the government level, where they then initiated direct beneficiary transfer linked to their national IDs, which has then kind of really driven away the corruption at that level. Another interesting scheme was that our government has introduced sort of free liquefied petroleum gas cylinders to rural households, because still in large parts of India, households are still using forest wood or firewood for their daily energy and food, making their food or their energy needs. So the government has given sort of a scheme where they give free cylinders and there is a free refill, and then there is also a subsidy to subsequent refills. So then, but what we realized when we started inspecting this on ground is that still the uptake of this was very less, and we all know the health ramifications that burning fuel wood can have. So then we understood that something like fuel stacking was happening, where they would be using these cylinders for very short-term work, like just making some little snacks or their tea, and they would be still using firewood for the more heavier tasks, the more heavier cooking, because the refill cost was still very high. So the out-of-pocket expenditure for these people was still this was very, very high. And there's a gender element also. So, India is a country, like many of us, full of intersectionalities. Financial decisions often stayed with the husband. So the health cost of the woman was obviously subservient to the financial implications that, say, a refill would have, accompanied by other perceptions around safety of the cylinder, etc. So, what this all makes us resign that policies may look good on paper, policies would be well intentioned, the laws will be in place. But if they do not correlate with social realities, with the everyday lives of the people, the real struggles when it comes to intersectionalities of gender, class, caste, um, and all of that, uh, policy is less likely to be a success. And this is a lesson that has shaped how I look at policy today. And in a simple way, I'll be like, if a policy fails on ground, it is because it was never really designed for the ground. And today, when I'm doing it in the highest, designing policies at the highest level of governance, I make sure that we try to involve the relevant stakeholders in the decision-making process. So often, when we went to the field to either preach about sanitation or health or education or sustainability or empowerment to the communities, we often, I think, many of us who are working in the social sector, maybe sometimes view them as passive beneficiaries. However, they may not speak the language of policy frameworks or log frames, but they understand constraints, they understand incentives, they understand trade-offs far better than any external consultant will. So one of the things, I'll give you an example. I was working in one of the northern states of India. It's full of mountains and it's very cold over there, where we were trying to support some green infrastructure projects. We were trying to build a greenhouse because the soil is not very conducive to have agriculture and all of that. So we're trying to build a greenhouse, have solar energy, uh, you know, some kind of hydroponics, some kind of sort of uh, energy efficiency over there. But we understood that, but then and we'd already started working on it. We'd collected the funds. We'd almost gone and done the recce, etc. But then we had some villagers coming up to us and they said, "What are you doing?" I said, "We are doing this." But they said, "Why are you doing this over here? We already have horticulture, floriculture. We already have orchards where we have apples and oranges and plums that we are selling. We rather need market linkages and a business plan and some microfinancing to kind of value add to these raw materials to make products and then link to the markets. So we don't need more raw materials. We don't need more agriculture. That also products which are for which this environment is not really conducive, but we rather need those market linkages. So why don't you provide that to us?" But I said, okay, we could do that. Our organization at that time, that the one I was working with, had a certain mandate. But I said, our mandate is to do something related to renewable energy infrastructure. So then they told us, okay, there are these monasteries on top of the mountains where the nuns live, and the temperatures over there go down to sub-zero degrees, and they do not have hot water over there, and so on and so forth. So then we decided to build solar bathing facilities for the nuns at this monastery. And then, how villagers told us that, the government has come and set up similar projects, but now they're in such a dilapidated condition because there is no maintenance. So what the infrastructure was made, the funding was done, but there was total disuse, and the infrastructure was no longer usable. So how we had to also kind of account for the maintenance aspect of it. And the third was just operationalizing it, buy-ins from the people who have to use it themselves. Uh, so, talking to the people who will be using it, letting those behavioral changes happen, whether the security reasons, because they had to walk a certain distance to these washrooms to kind of use them. So ensuring that entire ecosystem is in place. So this was the community telling us where energy was actually required, how maintenance could realistically happen, what kind of community guideline standards that we had to adhere to while talking to the nunneries, and why certain designs usually fail when outsiders kind of go outside the system. Another interesting thing that has not come from my experiences, but just talking about how communities are experts in their own end, is that in a similar area in the northern part of India, there is acute water shortage during springtime because the mountains the glaciers melt at a certain time, which is much later than when the farmers require the water. So one of the local entrepreneurs, what he did is he made it's a very simple technology, but a vertical pipe wherein water would flow from the higher regions to the lower regions during the sowing season. And when it would become very cold, it would kind of come out in the form and it would just freeze. It would freeze like a cone. Now, a cone, what it does is during winter, it increases the surface area. So what it does, it reduces melting as compared to what a straight sheet would do. So when the spring came and when the natural glaciers were not melting, these cones would then be melted and used for agriculture. A similar interesting step is being done, in say Meghalaya, which is in the in the eastern part of India. You can Google what the concept of living root bridges. So when your modern engineering and modern architecture will fail in the face of natural disasters, just go and see a picture of a living root bridge and you would know. And this has been sort of since ages that is somebody who's received a national award for making this living root bridge for years. It takes years because it's the natural roots of trees that are used and they're kind of pulled together to make a huge bridge which connects across rivers. And it's still very, it's there everywhere in many eastern states of India. So the field has taught me that expertise does not always wear credentials. And sometimes it just comes quietly as lived experience, just waiting to be acknowledged. So whenever we're going down into the field, of course, we bring our own expertise and intention, but let's not view communities as passive recipients of our knowledge or our, whatever intervention, but as active stakeholders, in the process. So this is a picture that I'm sharing when I was working with some tribal communities in the eastern part of India. Two of the pictures are mine as well. But an interesting story about this is that we had actually gone there to engage with certain tribal communities. Some of them were not very they did not have too much trust in the state. So through a society organization had gone there to just engage with the adult population because we wanted to initiate some projects in sustainable agriculture, energy, sanitation, etc. But then we realized that the adults were extremely reluctant to talk to us. In fact, they really viewed us as a threat. And they would just run away whenever we tried to approach them. But then we saw there was a group of, children playing nearby. And then we thought that, okay, why don't we start with children? So then we started bringing the children together. We sort of started with integrating sports and arts. That's some of you who worked in the field of sports for development or arts for development or similar areas would know the power of such interventions in bringing communities together and in building trust. And we took to these interventions not because they were soft, but because they were safe and safe spaces where there was no suspicion, there was, of extraction, of surveillance, of any political intent, just raw joy and, the feeling of coming together. And slowly, when the kids became engaged, we started regular classes, we hired teachers. As of today, it's a full-fledged school with the full senior secondary. We've aligned them with the National Education Board. There are exams. The students are going out and participating in, national level examinations. But then going back, so when this started to happen, parents began to observe not through meetings, but just through their everyday presence. They would come and see what their children were doing and just be very, very happy about it. And parents saw consistency and a purity of intent day by day, week by week, and they opened up slowly. Uh, a little bit, not to reform, but at least to a conversation. So what we started to do was that, but they were still reluctant to talk to us. So we started growing the kind of organic products or, the agricultural produce because there was no agriculture over there and they had no livelihood of sorts. But that area was very conducive to agriculture. Um, so we started growing that in our backyard of our institution. And then we realized that after some days, some of them had been stolen. And then some more had been stolen. So the third or fourth time that they come, we stopped them. And we told them that we will not let you steal, but we will help you learn how to grow. Would you be open to that? And I think because of all the intervention with the children and the initial trust building, they were open to that. And then is when the learning truly began. So then discussions on sustainable farming practices, they helped us set up solar panels, they helped us in, you know, hydropower projects, windmills. We've established all of that in, those areas, and they became active stakeholders in it. Uh, it's because they were not whatever we were trying to do, it was not seen as an external imposition, but something that the community chose to engage with. Uh, and I think a lot of that distrust in us came because past engagement had often been transactional or extractive. So the trust really had to be developed before anything, we could do anything forward. So, and I realized that once trust is built, then people are willing to engage with the government, with state actors, with the programs. They are able to ask why benefits have not reached them and, raise their voice. And they're able to work with institutions much more open to. So trust, of course, does not make communities compliant, but it definitely makes them confident participants, which is extremely important because it's only this confidence which then turns development into ownership. So trust as a development intervention is an extremely important part when we look to drive any change at the grassroots level. So now, when I completed my law and then I started practicing for a bit, but largely I practiced in the area of environmental litigation, human rights, because that's where my heart lay. But I realized very early on that law on paper is definitely not law in practice. And as you can see, uh, on paper, of course, the rights are universal, but in reality, the access to these rights really depends on voice, on what identity you hold, your literacy level, the geography, the finance, the fear, and the time that you have. And I ended up encountering the same pattern, the most vulnerable, women facing gender violence, children in conflict with law, tribal and marginalized communities, victims of environmental harm and displacement. They often had sort of legal rights, but no real ability to use them. And as we say, this is the case where procedures of the law actually ended up defeating the purpose of the law. So this is what really so then I realized that, of course, being a lawyer, it's not just about outcomes. It's not about winning cases. It's also to know that people have access and they feel safe when they enter this system, which is supposed to make them feel safe. And reforms is, of course, not about better laws alone, but it's about developing institutions which understand human vulnerability and needs. So this is when I shifted from litigation per se to working in judicial reform, started working with sort of state high courts and other courts on different projects, vulnerable witness deposition complexes to create a safe space for witnesses of crimes against women and children, developing doorstep justice programs. So there are areas in India which get cut off from courts during certain winter months or during some security emergencies, and they have no access. And so at times, in the absence of community level institutions, the courts actually become your first and last opportunity for a remedy. So then we launched a program in which those people could use the local state government offices. It could be a post office, it could be any state-driven institution, and we made them, collaborate with the nearest courts. They could file their sort of plea from there. They could file all their papers from there, and it would just come to the court. There would be video conferencing, and here I'm talking about places which have, we don't have so much internet or digital sort of penetration, but we tried to enable that. Then we would host camp courts. We started this concept of camp courts, where the judges in a weekly or a monthly basis would come and visit these communities. So where people could not come to the courts, the court would go to the people. So many of such projects I started working in because I felt that uh, I was, my passion actually lay in improving access to justice and ensuring that procedures don't exclude rather than just winning cases or viewing justice as just a system. Of course, and then I also engaged in sensitization programs, conducted legal literacy camps. So then the crux is that the realization had come abroad that, procedure can exclude as much as it can protect. And if justice systems are not designed around human needs, human vulnerabilities, social realities, they risk reproducing the very same harms that they were meant to remedy. And that is not something that would be very helpful. So the tilt towards international negotiations. After working in human rights law, after working in environment law, in justice reform institutions, I had also parallelly taken certification in international negotiation and alternate dispute resolution. And that's where I got a chance to work with the government in negotiations, as I told you. But I understood that, negotiation I mean, it's actually just listening disguised as a strategy. So, on the ground, when you work for a cause, the objective is often very clear. What is right and wrong? Yes, it's colored, but it's often also universal in a certain way. But at the negotiating table, the reality is slightly more complex. You're juggling multiple and often competing interests even within your own country. So, industry bodies, farmers, workers of that particular sector, social groups, NGOs, environmental, priorities, the positions of different departments in your own government. So navigating all this while still trying to safeguard national interests, and that too in a shifting geopolitical landscape, uh, was extremely difficult. But one main thing that is my fourth point on this slide that I realized is that one must never argue on positions and always, collaborate or discuss across interests because positions are in a simple way what we want, what I want, but it's the interests which actually go to see why we want something. And when we're able to really pinpoint why we want something, we're able to, open up many possibilities. There's a lot of value addition that can happen on the why. But if we go by what, then it's obviously extremely rigid and it doesn't serve any purpose. The other thing is that, yes, that preparation really mattered a lot. As a lawyer, when I had read every footnote, vetted every clause, understood every domestic complaint or constraint, and I, kind of mapped global norms, I knew that at the negotiating table, preparation actually became real leverage because when you have a good, deep understanding of everything that is happening, you're able to make decisions. You're able to really drive decisions which would be in the best interest of both. So technical detail really became an armor over there. And negotiations and with all these stakeholders, they also shifted my thinking to a more multi-dimensional decision making of sort, from one sector to many, from immediate positioning to long-term strategic thinking, where we kind of used to weigh financial, economic, developmental, geopolitical considerations in making decisions. So then all of this was just about, balancing a lot of complexity, creating space for alignment, and quietly shaping outcomes that endure long after the room is empty. So I think these were my five main, takeaways from the negotiations table. Then, of course, listen before you speak. Try to understand why the other person wants something and why that thing is important to this. And this is not just restricted to negotiations; it's restricted to any decision or communication that you're going to have in your everyday lives. Whatever field you're in, make sure you can consider yourself to be an expert. So do not do superficial preparation, go into the technical detail, and always look at the opportunities that can come out from that conversation. Do not be rigid and just open yourself to the various possibilities of value creation that can come out from any conversation that you have. Now, coming to my role, my current policy-making role with the government, having worked here for some years, I've realized that every policy somehow seems to be a compromise. Compromise between ambition and feasibility, between speed and institutional capacity, between administrative efficiency and political intent. So a lot of times I realize that the ideas don't fail because they're wrong, but they fail because they're misaligned. They're misaligned with implementation capabilities, with timelines, execution capacity. I also realize that budgets reveal what political speeches don't. Allocations, phasing, conditionalities tell you much more than the political rhetoric we come across. So, as many of us critical thinking citizens, as future nation builders, and whatever part of the world, it's very difficult. It's very important to look at the particularities of where money is actually being spent and whether that allocation is in the larger equitable interest of the various stakeholders in your community, in your society. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, it's implementation and not just intent that will decide success. So if you have a great scheme, but if the fund flows are unclear, the roles are unclear, frontline capacity is weak, then there is some disjunction with reality and the policy is likely not to work. Uh, so for me, I've had to kind of even in this process, as I did below, have to navigate multiple ministries, multiple interests, multiple mandates to really come to funding decisions. Because, say, one ministry would be fighting for a certain budget, the other would be kind of fighting for another. But sitting in this sort of an umbrella position, one is able to see, have a big picture view of, firstly, have a vision of where your nation wants to grow, be able to break it apart into short-term and medium-term goals, and then make it sectorally relevant as well. So you know how much money, what sector, needs to be allocated. And even within those sectors, what is the area? Is it the human resource development component? Is it the infrastructure? Is it the economic opportunities component, which requires sort of um, needs to be prioritized. And finally, ensuring that the basic principles of governance are embedded, accountability, transparency, stakeholders, participation, and all of that. So these are some key things that, I would like to share from my sort of policy making and project appraisal space that, yes, implementation decides success. uh, Budgets and particularities of where your money is going will, actually tells you what is being prioritized. It's extremely important to have all stakeholders on board and at the same time ensure that the governance principles are followed and there is absolute accountability to citizens. Now, finally, coming to something which is extremely close to my heart, it is my organization that I made for the culture and the arts. I started this organization because, yes, I've done law, I've done policy, but I feel that data moves minds, but arts moves hearts. And it reminded me of something essential. It's that systems really need humanity. So I do not see culture as anything separate from public policy or public work, but I rather just see it as another tool to shape discourse, to impact narratives, especially around issues that data and reports alone fail to reach. So through Shrinkla, we try to create thematic productions on different social political issues, social questions around gender, sustainability, power. I've also tried to include youth and tribal communities to kind of give them a platform, and through these themes, also try to break certain stereotypes because classical dance is supposed to be done in a certain way. It's supposed to tell certain stories. But through this venture, I'm trying to kind of bridge the gap of my education, the experiences I've had on ground in the field, use the classical and sort of tribal and folk arts to tell a story which is much more relatable to the masses. So this is something which has been extremely close to my heart, and which I feel is very complementary to the main intent that I have. So I can see that we're almost at the end of the time, and I would like to keep some time for the question. Any you would have any questions or answers. So my final two slides, where I just want to wrap up my general, key takeaways. First is, of course, that, and I won't go into in specific order, is that across villages, across courtrooms, across NGOs, international places, we I have understood that many ideas fail because systems are not ready to deliver them. So implementation capacity really, really determines success. Second is that real understanding comes from staying with the problem long enough to see how it unfolds in practice, whether it's community work, whether you want to see implementation failures. These second order effects, these implementations of unended consequences can only happen if you work on the ground. So speed would create movement, but depth would create judgment. The third part was for me, interdisciplinarity is not a choice, it's actually survival. As nation builders, as problem solvers, I felt that these problems are rarely from a single sector or highly technical. So because like say, justice reform, it informs budgets, human behavior, infrastructure. Sustainability projects will be equally about livelihood, governance, and trust. So the ability to connect law, economics, administration, social realities fiscal prudence, operationalization of something. And kind of bringing it all together is what determines whether an idea would work or perhaps would not. Then is that ethics are tested early and long before expertise. So every delivery system kind of involves trade-offs between speed and fairness, efficiency versus inclusion, compliance versus compassion. And these tests rarely announce themselves, but they appear in small decisions: what you question, what you normalize, whose interests you choose to prioritize. Expertise, therefore, may get you in the room, but it is integrity that determines how long you stay there. And lastly, institutions change slowly. And, this is something that this is a personal sort of experience, is that when we talk about careers, uh, I have had all these experiences actually pour into the person that I have become today. And there is one thing that has guided me throughout is my core intention, the purpose why I'm doing this, and the values that drive me. So these diverse experiences have rather reinforced than diluted my journey. So yes, uh, so finally, if there are some key things I would like to share with all of you, and I'd like to also narrow it down to say a career path, because many of you are students, maybe students, or are in the early parts of your career, is that choose problems, not titles. Titles will change, institutions change, sectors may also change, but the problems you choose will stay with you. So don't ask what role sounds impressive. Rather ask, what problem do I want to spend 10 years thinking about? Because prestige will fade quickly, but meaning doesn't. Second, stay close to the field, even when your work involves being in elite spaces. So I've worked in all sorts of contexts, but what kept me grounded has been regular return to the field, constantly listening, engaging, observing, and being uncomfortable in the process. Because policy or decision making without proximity to the ground becomes abstraction, and expertise without exposure can become arrogance. Third, do protect your values earlier, because uh, in the early years of your career, you may have the least power and the most pressure to conform. And this is exactly where your ethics will be tested long before even your expertise might be. So don't let, if you do not define your boundaries, someone else will define them for you. I learned to say no early, even if it was inconvenient. And that clarity has guided every later decision that I've taken. And your values will guide you when your resume cannot. Fourth, pursue coherence over perfection. Careers today are rarely linear because mine certainly has not been. But what matters is a coherent story where each experience kind of builds depth, perspective, and intent. So your career should make sense looking back and doesn't really need to look tidy along the way, as long as your intent is in the right place. Finally, anchor your career in purpose and not pace. This is a long journey. I'm myself very young. I seem to be talking like an old lady. But this is truly something that I've already kind of experienced. And I truly believe that, burnout in our everyday lives, it doesn't come from hard work. It comes from being in spaces where we're disconnected, where we feel alienated. But staying connected to the impact of your work, to the real change is what sustains motivation over the year. So do keep, your career anchored in your purpose. So finally, I come back. We circle back to what we began with, that the field is not a place. It's not a project site. It's not a village, but it's a mindset. It's a way of engaging with the world with curiosity and empathy. It's choosing to listen before you analyze, observe before you prescribe, and stay open even when assumptions are uncomfortable. The field will unsettle you, it will challenge your identity. But if you stay and really listen, it will give your work meaning. And in a world obsessed with speed, status, and surface success, meaning is what will sustain you. So wherever your career takes you, I really hope you carry the field with you, not as a phase that you'll outgrow, but as a mindset that you'll never abandon. And I believe this is how work becomes purpose and careers become a life of consequence. Thank you very much. I end my presentation with this, and I would be happy to look at any questions that we may have. So if anybody has any questions, I would be very happy to answer them. You can put them in the question and answer session. I think as of now, I don't see any questions here.
Thank you, Tanushri, for such an engaging talk, and also for sharing those reflections and insights which were grounded and candid. I'm sure the audience is still collecting themselves after the great presentation you've provided and mulling through their brains in terms of how best to answer those to ask those questions. But as Tanushri did mention, everyone on the call, please use this time to pop in your questions in the chat box. We still have a couple of more minutes, about 10 more minutes or so before the panel discussion. So please do pick Tanushri's brain while we still have her. Since I have the privilege of speaking right now, my question would be, what drove you to start your organization, the Arts and Development Organization? What was the driver behind that?
Right. Thank you so much. I think I've seen one question in the Q&A. I'll take that up and I'll then take the question I just got. So the question in the Q&A is that why, I did not be driven towards hyper specializing, which is, developing expertise in one field, is because I had such a wide upbringing. Since a very young age, I was exposed to different grassroots level realities. The trips from my school rather used to be in rural villages. They would be working with communities across different issues, be it sanitation, health, women's health, social justice, crimes, so on and so forth. And I slowly realized from a very young age that the problems cannot be divided into silos. Most of them have very interdisciplinary solutions. And for me, the journey has been highly organic. I did not choose to be working in such a broad base. Even today, when I'm working with the government of India on the project and schemes, the proposals, I have around 12 ministries under me. So I work on projects from agriculture to rural development, culture, tourism, education, law and justice, sports, and every second day we're getting a different project. And this is a role that I would never be able to do if I had hyper specialized at one point of time. Also, when you go higher up in certain levels, you realize that the broad multidisciplinary and intersection, you're able to see intersectionalities, interlinkages between different uh, subject areas, like I also mentioned in my presentation. So agriculture is not just about agriculture. It will be about climate. It will be about gender roles. It will be about productivity and economics. It will be about trade and how all of this kind of comes together. And this logic can be applied across multiple sectors. And my journey has largely been organic, where some questions that my current discipline or workplace was not able to address, I tried to find in the next. Like I mentioned, like sociology opened me to the social realities of the world and why people do certain things. So then I wanted to develop the ability to stand for these people, to give them a voice. And that's when I did law. When I entered law, I understood that laws often exist on paper, but are they actually reaching the masses? Is access to justice truly there? Then I realized that perhaps my role as a lawyer would be limited because I had broader interests of institution building and governance reform as what drove me. Then that is what led me to do public policy, which has now given me the broad opportunity to pursue multiple sectors. One thing that has stayed with me through my technical role in policy is that I may have a generalized subject area, but I have very specific skill sets that I've deep dived into, be it data analysis, be it legal drafting, be it economic or fiscal analysis or environmental, looking at something from an environmental lens. I have deeply developed expertise in these skills that I can now apply across multiple sectors. So when I mean by being a sort of not an expert, I would say it is in terms of sectors. But if you want to really, but I said that depth is important. So while you spread is good to get that broad awareness, but depth in terms of skill sets and proficiency in your core discipline is extremely important going forward. Coming to the second question of what drove me to make my own organization was at a time this started at a time when I was not very well versed with, say, government systems or legal justice institutions, but a simple form of rebellion, because in Indian classical dance, there are certain limited kind of stories that we are quote unquote allowed to depict, maybe some mythological stories around certain gods, goddesses, certain very sort of cliche, very beautiful, but certain limited number of pieces that we could depict. I found that to be very constraining. That has been my nature also. So that led me to question that art is a medium. If movies can be made on social issues, on philosophical, kind of thoughts, why can't we use Indian classical dance also towards that? Because currently it had only been happening for contemporary dance. Because of course it's not, breaking out of boundaries is difficult. So that's what was my first motivation for starting my own organization, is to use arts as a means of engaging in social dialogue. So we have done productions on global warming, farmer suicides, reproductive rights of women. We've gone on to, depict the philosophies of the Buddha and, many such philosophical themes as well. So for me, it became another form of expression. So art, not just as a, beauty in itself, but as a means to an end, the end being more social awareness. And the second platform, second thing I realized that the folk arts, so apart from the classical arts, there are also folk arts in India, because of course everybody knows about Bollywood, everybody knows about the movies and all. Uh, but that's kind of dwindling away, and that's a core, cultural heritage. So I wanted to create some platforms in which I could involve those tribal and folk art forms as well at national level platforms. And then I got, connect, and because of my work with these NGOs, etc., I got contacts through those tribal communities and dance groups, many of which who had actually left dancing and they started to do some menial jobs. So then we kind of onboarded them and we've involved them in our productions going forward. So this is like a two objective reason. One was to break the kind of things I could portray, and the second is to give a platform to indigenous artists. Uh, okay, Melissa has asked me, looking back, is there anything in your career trajectory that you would do differently based on what you know now? It's it's extremely difficult to answer that, given that even I am not aware of, the what I'm able to do today is largely an outcome of the worldview and the skills and the exposure I've had throughout. So today I am doing a skill for the Ministry of Commerce and Trade, and I'm able to understand where that ministry comes off because I've worked there. I'm appraising schemes in law and justice. So for me, I think, given by the fact of the role I currently have, everything I've done so far has just been supplemental, and I don't think I would do anything differently. And I'm always open to experimenting. So I think a year down the line, you'll see me in a different role doing something else. So I don't think there is anything I would do differently in my career trajectory. So, okay, Omar asked me, have you been able to achieve your career goals? And if yes, what's the roadmap or trajectory? How impactful have your skills translated to personal growth? And what metrics were you able to justify them? So I don't think I have any career goal as such. What I really have is this, you know, the feeling and the purpose of the impact that I want to make. And I will be open to working with any other organization or institution which imbibes the same values or allows me to work in spaces that can have an impact. So I think I'm very happy in the place I am, but I don't think my career stops here. I think the roadmap or trajectory I have very well sort of defined all through my presentation. And of course, the skills have translated into personal growth, because at a personal level, I think it's been a largely humbling experience. I have been confronted with my own privilege, my own biases, my own preconceived notions. So I think more than professional, personally, I've got to learn a lot through the processes. And I think the time is coming to the end. So the last question is that, given how interconnected real world problems and policies really are, how do you overcome decision making and budgetary silos that are built into our institutions? Interestingly, this is the exact role that my current, the body that I work with gets to play, because we get projects from different ministries and departments, but we are the ones who have this broad umbrella overarching perspective towards everything. So from engaging with relevant stakeholders to listening to all the relevant ministries talking to grassroots level organizations, getting consulting firms and sectoral experts on board to give their thing, and doing our own data analysis around the financial rate or the economic rate of return or the social cost effectiveness that can happen of our projects. Our task itself is to ensure that the budgets are spread in a more equitable manner, focusing on those sectors which are, of course, nation building, but which also reflect the social realities that we stay in. So I think the appraisal process is a check and balance mechanism in our government where we're able to have that sort of overarching view and then sort of drive decisions accordingly. So I am privileged to be in such a role. So I think it's exactly 5:30 over here. My time probably comes to an end. If there is any other question, I will be happy to address.
Thank you so much, Tanushri, and thank you so much, everyone, for posing those questions and allowing us to engage Tanushri further. I think those insights and those reflections, even from a relatively short career, as you put it, not being an old lady yet, gives us a lot of ideas for us to learn from and also learn with as part of the Commonwealth Scholarship alumni and current scholars. Thank you so much for your time, Tanushri. We will now move into what promises to be a dynamic and forward-looking panel discussion on building capacity, building nations, the future of equitable global commerce. To guide this conversation, I'm delighted to hand over to Caroline Kichoncho, who is the program manager at the Commonwealth Scholarship Commission. And with that, I invite everyone to please move over to the panel discussion session.